Hey, it's me, Rose La Fabi Loca, and we are going to take down white supremacy, one pendejo at a time. This is the Sabe podcast. Welcome back to the Sabe podcast, where we discuss social, political, and economic issues impacting minorities today. I hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode regarding minorities' toxic glorification of family and feminism being for white women. If you haven't already, go ahead and check those episodes out and let me know what you think. And I have to say, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube and share if you care, as we take down white supremacy one pendejo at a time. So today's topic is called Black Women, America's Forgotten Pioneers, because we are going to be discussing a few pertinent ideas regarding Black women and their current state in America in relation to race, relationships, American identity, and social aspects. Now, this episode is in no way an encapsulation of the Black female experience or some sort of I don't know how you would say summary. This isn't meant to be a summary of Black women or some sort of window into the female Black experience, because I don't feel like that's my place to do that. And there are numerous Black female podcasters you can check out for that perspective, like Hood X Holistic, Horrible Decisions, etc. So when I sat down to write out my plans for this episode, I had to really take a step back for a moment, not only to really flesh out my ideas, but also because I had to think about what it is I'm ultimately reaching for in this episode. I don't want to be another blogger or person on social media or podcaster that's just regurgitating or echoing the Black experience for Black women. And I'm not by any means criticizing you all for participating in that, because what you're doing is giving someone else's words and experiences visibility in a time when the world feels they have time to listen, even though they always had time to listen, but they chose to do other things instead. But anyway, it is important to display your activism by reposting and resharing in order to elevate Black voices. So it's good to capitalize on the pandemic in ways that we can, but this is not what I'm talking about for this episode. What I'm talking about is this really hard reflection I had to do about this episode, because not only are there going to be Black people and Black females listening to this episode, but there's going to be non-Black people also listening. So I have placed this tremendous responsibility and pressure on myself to make sure that I get everything right and that I'm contributing something to the cause instead of editorializing it, Because Black women have their own voices, and they don't need the rest of us speaking on behalf of them, because all that does is perpetuate this idea that they can't be the face of their own cause, that they have to entrust other people or light-skinned people to fight for them because they aren't given the platforms to do so. Or simply that they can talk but that no one is listening unless it's being delivered in some roundabout, walking on eggshells to be politically correct for white people kind of way. So what I wanted them to know is this. From where I stand, you ladies are strong as fuck, born and bred that way. What others have to learn over a lifetime, you learn by simply being born. To accept others for a difference in skin, to embrace natural beauty, to uplift one another in sisterhood, and to your men in empathy and loyalty, to be strong and fearless, to know and practice sacrifice. I mean, the list goes on and on when it comes to the responsibility placed on Black women's shoulders just by simply being born. So I felt like I needed to make this episode because we are already halfway through season 1, and I think we have cleared the floor for this episode. And I felt like because of that, it was time to do something no one else has done or is doing, and it's to make an episode that is entirely centered around this idea of sending a message of alliance to Black women while also educating non-Black people of color and white people on how we've allowed history to forget their monumental contributions to American society and beyond. And this is not because I have Black female friends, not because I've dated Black men, not because Blackness is trending, but because it's long overdue to give the credit. We say protect Black women, but that doesn't just mean entering into hostile internet arguments in order to shut down racist keyboard warriors. It also means sitting down and openly giving that love to a community of women who often go neglected. I've read tons of forums, seen a lot of Twitter threads, watched a lot of arguments, and something that is often a shared sentiment among Black women is how a lot of other women of other cultures, not just white women, want to play a part in joining in on Black culture, but when it really comes time to identify and fight, they are nowhere to be found. And as a non-Black person of color, I felt like in a podcast where we are so openly discussing race and social issues, it's important to bring visibility to this community and women and stand as an ally by dedicating episodes to them. So when I hear the word protect, the first thing that comes to mind to me is children, the most vulnerable in our society, right? And I thought about one of the ways we protect children. And one of the ways that kids feel protected is when their parents hold them in their arms and just keep them there. And they feel surrounded by that love, those words of affirmation. And it's this really intimate moment I've seen so many times with women and their children. And there seems to be this like unspoken bond because young kids haven't developed their speech and communication of emotions yet. So mothers just know when a child needs that hug or that cuddle of protection or those words of affirmation. So I felt like I wanted to show people through this podcast another way that we can make sure that Black women are seen and heard. And it's by writing them this sort of like love letter that lets them know how much I see them. And this episode is about the women that I believe have been pioneers of this country as we know it today, and who often go forgotten when we praise femininity and natural beauty. And what is more natural than melanin skin? I feel like when God creates Black women, it's just an additional brushstroke of color, that like extra hint of beauty, the kind of physical feature that's so prominent that it defines someone's beauty. Some people like pronounced and bold eyebrows, some people have high cheekbones, some people have freckles, these very outward vocal expressions of uniqueness and beauty. And Black women can have all of these things on top of the extra brushstroke of color. So when we praise beauty and talk about beauty standards, I'm just baffled by how we so often leave out beautiful, deep and warm skin colors, a physical feature that's so prominently seen and then so rarely praised. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So for those of you that might be just joining us on this episode, I'm coming from the space as a Hispanic woman who has had the privilege of being close to many Black women, and different kinds of them. Black women in the LGBTQ community, Black women in poverty, Black women in high-class society, Black women in the country, Black women in New York City, Black women who are old, Black women who are young, Black women with white men, Black women with Black men, Black women into hip-hop, Black women into Naruto, girly Black women who are tomboys, Black women with post-secondary education, Black women who dropped out of high school, Black women in the Hispanic community, Black women in the African American community, Black women from the Caribbean. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's important for me to say that so that people know I'm coming from this intention of highlighting the importance of Black women in our society and arguing that no civil justice is going to be had if we are not taking the time out to understand this community and its women, to send out all of our love for them through spoken word and true activism. Like, think about women in the context of just the planet itself, regardless of ethnic identity. Women have a particularly important role in society on a basic animal reproductive level. And so I think that it would be nice if instead of saying Hispanic people or Asian people for this topic, instead saying for the first time in the podcast, I want to ask all women. We talked about intersectional feminism last week, and that's the foundation of this theme. I'm calling upon all women, regardless of ethnic background, to use their words and their platforms to stand with Black women, to let them know that they are seen and heard, because a big portion of white supremacy is married to the institution of the patriarchy, and it's important that all women on social media take part in this. It's not to say men partaking isn't important, but there's something extra impactful about women-led and women-supported movements, and I think it has to do with our sheer responsibility of being the gender that carries and delivers life. You see, of course it takes sperm from a man to produce a child with a woman's eggs, right? So men are just as necessary to repopulate and distribute DNA, but who is it up to nurture that fetus, to bond with it, to deliver it in as healthy of a way as possible? It's on the woman by default because it's in her body, right? Now, of course, the father can provide food for nourishment for the pregnant woman or help contribute to a stable living condition to where she doesn't stress so much, but the actual self-discipline it takes to make sure you're eating properly, getting the right nutrition, not smoking and drinking, not taking in excess caffeine, etc. The biology, the science of it, all of those decisions come down to women. So just on a simple nature level, women are, by sheer anatomy, made to bear the majority portion of responsibility, care, and self-discipline in order to populate the planet we occupy in a healthy way. So if we see women for the amazing, strong people that they are, just on a scientific level, let's apply that now towards specific racial structures in different societies. For example, the life and position of a woman living in the Middle East can be a much different lifestyle than that of an African American woman in America. But despite these different conditions and social expectations in each country, the fact remains true about both groups of women. In their respective countries, their lives are constantly in danger. And this danger that all women face because of the violence against us is heightened when you start getting into location and racial group. And in America, Black women have been seen throughout social history as part of one of the most dangerous groups in America, rather than being seen as one of the most in danger groups in America, which is the reality a la Breonna Taylor. And the sad part about it is that this country was not only built on the backs of Black slaves, but more specifically, Black women have literally helped create a certain status and level of motherhood that we see today for white women and beyond. Let's look back into slavery when Black female slaves would be forced to breastfeed the white children of their mistresses, known as wet nursing. Breastfeeding is an extremely intimate bonding experience that women have with their babies, and yet at that time, a lot of white women couldn't be bothered to do so. It was a responsibility put on Black slaves to do for them. Forcing Black slaves to breastfeed white babies was an excuse for white mothers to avoid breastfeeding in order to maintain their figures and not have to dabble in what they perceived to be the messy part of motherhood. So in this era, the act of breastfeeding was actually perceived to be self-demeaning, and women who did choose to breastfeed were thought of as uncultured, poor, and were outcasted. So wet nursing became very popular when doctors did everything they could to prove that breastfeeding was an unhealthy act for women, and they were paid huge amounts of money to write reports saying that. Now, because of this take on breastfeeding, a lot of white children died young because of poor health. So in Western culture, they forced slave mothers to breastfeed their white children so that they could develop better and survive childhood. Yes, that's right, a lot of white ancestors are alive today because of wet nursing from a Black slave. So when we talk about, Black women and certain medical issues that they face at large numbers, for example, I suffer from fibroids. Fibroids is basically tumors that are non-cancerous that grow on your uterus, either inside the uterus or outside the uterus, and it can make you appear pregnant. You have periods for weeks at a time, you have heavy bleeding, it usually causes anemia, hair loss. It can crush your other surrounding organs depending on how big it gets, and that is actually a disease that is so prevalent in the African American community of women specifically. And this is a disease that there's no cure for right now. The temporary cure for it is to either have a myomectomy, which means to remove the tumor from your uterus, or to have a hysterectomy, which just sterilizes you altogether. And so a lot of doctors have pushed for hysterectomy for women who have fibroids. And is anyone talking about that? Is anyone talking about the fact that on a mass level, people are sterilizing Black women across the country? Or let's dig even deeper. Why would this disease be something that's particular to Black women, especially African American women specifically? Is it because of the fact that there's that history of slavery? Perhaps a history of slavery contributes to this medical condition for Black women today. We don't know. We talked about epigenetics, and we've talked a little bit about slavery and all of that, all those traumas that go on and how it takes a toll on your health. And there's so much that is unresearched because Black women simply don't trust the government to test on them to find out why exactly this affects them specifically. But to be honest, if we're just looking at a common sense level, I'd imagine that their reproductive issues and their heavy periods, their likelihood to have endometriosis, all of those reproductive issues, I have a feeling has something to do with slavery. So again, when we talk about they weren't the ones that were slaves, why are they so upset? It is so ignorant to make that statement because Black women are still dealing with the effects of slavery. And even if it's not something that's necessarily prevalent in their day-to-day lives, the way that it would be back in the day where it was apparent that they were slaves, they still deal with the constant barrage of the effects of it. So the fact that people are so ignorant with that shit just drives me crazy, because I'm like, how do you guys not see how fucking hard it is to be black, and to be a black woman specifically? Now, if I can try to picture what the social aspect was like for wet nursing in a realistic way, I'd imagine it probably went a few different ways. I feel like there were probably a lot of black women who were repulsed at the beginning of breastfeeding these kids, because why shouldn't they be repulsed? And maybe they stayed repulsed by the responsibility for their entire servitude. I don't know. Or maybe there were some of them who were repulsed in the beginning, but then couldn't help but grow a small bond with these white babies. Maybe there was a connection between them. This idea that this innocent baby who knows nothing of slavery and white supremacy is simply in that moment with them, not meaning to punish or demand anything of them, but rather just there in a situation that wasn't just economic, but it was also social and political. But those babies didn't know until they were old enough to know. So maybe there was that looming sadness of the idea that it was the one time in a white person's life where they would bond with a black person at that time, and black women were responsible for being able to give life to those children in an era where those same children would later turn around and trade them and sell that black slave's offspring. The whole situation was fucked up. It's not enough to acknowledge the era of slavery as this thing in the past. One, because the institution of slavery hasn't ended globally on this planet, but also because the system of it has impacted an entire group of people and women forever. It has altered their entire experience even to this day. Even if they themselves were not victim to the slave treatment their ancestors faced, how do you think it makes black women feel when we share images of lynchings, police brutality, and black children crying in fear for their lives, or black women wet nursing white children? How do you think that would make them feel? Because even if they don't know that person personally, or don't know the people in the pictures or the videos, those people look like them, and those people could easily be their relative or friends. And when we talk about the black experience, these little ideas are actually not little at all. They define a person's entire lifetime, which is why we say that saying, "you don't see color," is not helpful at all whatsoever, because that person does see color, and they live in a society where maybe you don't see color, allegedly, but a lot of other people do, and not in a positive way, and it exudes from them through racism. So not seeing color doesn't help to end racism and the brutal treatment toward black women. This is my first point of this episode. I'm talking to the black women listening right now and saying to them that society, for a good period post-civil rights, has put blinders on by saying that they don't see color, and that racism doesn't exist just because they don't personally see it or practice it. And I'm here to say, in my words of love to you, that this is a big way in which we have failed you. And if no one else says it to you, I am so sorry of how many times we have failed you as a society. And while I can't speak on behalf of others, I can say that I will always use any breath or space I have to let people know that they need to see you in circles where none of you are present right now, which happens so very often. Which brings me to my second point. In popular culture, a lot of celebrities have had mistakes and missteps when it comes to advocacy for non-black people of color. One of those people is Miss Gina Rodriguez, who takes every opportunity in conversations centered around black voices or women to tie her Latin experience and the Latino experience overall to, and continuously ignores the existence of Afro-Latinas entirely in these comments that she makes. And here's the problem that so many people didn't understand about why Gina Rodriguez was problematic AF for this. I mean, to be honest, I don't even think Gina herself knows why she was problematic for this, which is how sleep she is. It has taken hundreds and hundreds of years for black women to even get invited to a number of limited seats at any table for visibility. Even at round tables where the discussion is centered around black voices, they often have a white host coming from the angle of, how can we understand you all better? Hollywood panders to black women, and black women know they do too, which is why people like Gina Rodriguez are not invited to a cookout. Because why? Because in a conversation talking about certain black struggles, she is the girl on the couch saying, "Oh my God, Hispanics too." And while it's important to identify with someone and say, "I see you and I empathize because I've been there too," if an event or a get-together is for black women to discuss being black women, we don't need to talk about Hispanic women or Asian women, etc. We need to keep the focus on black women. It only benefits Hispanic people and Hispanic women to prioritize these kinds of topics and discussions, because freeing black women in the African American community helps to free black women across all ethnicities. I'm always disappointed by the fact that in conversations with black women talking about their black experience or in pay disparities in Hollywood, Gina Rodriguez inserts her light-skinned Latin experiences that overlap in a misguided attempt to show that we suffer too. And that is her proximity to white privilege trying to enter into black conversations and black spaces. If she really feels the need to have an opinion that's relevant and related to the Latin experience, she should be using the one seat at the table for a Latina that was given to her for some reason to give visibility to the fact that black sisters in her own damn ethnicity weren't even considered to invite to a table to discuss black issues in America or pay disparities in Hollywood with women. Like, when she had that round table with Gabrielle Union and Ellen Pompeo, why was that chair given to her and not Zoe Saldana? Why do people constantly forget that Zoe Saldana is an Afro-Latina? She is Puerto Rican and Dominican just like me. That is truly what is wrong with this country's perception of black women, is that not only do they go ignored as a whole for African Americans, but they also go ignored even questioned in other ethnic minority groups. Like, they go ignored even as Afro-Latinas. Like, what the hell? So this is my second point to black women. Like, for too long as Hispanics, we haven't given visibility to our own black sisters. We haven't been invited to tables and said, you know what? I have a slew of Afro-Latina friends who really deserve this platform, who really deserve the opportunity to sit here with all of you and feel a reflection of their own experiences in your African American stories, and to have an opportunity to find solace in a community that extends into their own life and struggles. And they should really be the ones sitting at this table for this special or whatever it is, this interview, etc. And so while Hispanics as a whole are also rarely seen and heard, if no one has told you, I am sorry that we have failed you in that sisterhood, in that opportunity to give up our seats so that you all, our Afro-Latina sisters, had a chance to talk about how traumatically we have treated you all. And just because I personally didn't ever partake in that doesn't mean I shouldn't use my platform to say that if no one has told you, I am deeply sorry for that. My third point is that we have seen such an erasure in black women's contributions to society and in the women's movement specifically. Sojourner Truth, after being freed by the Emancipation Proclamation in New York, became an activist for abolition and women's rights. Harriet Tubman risked her life over and over and over again to bring others to freedom. Ida B. Wells is a founding member of the NAACP, and she used her gift of writing in local black news organizations and led an aggressive campaign in print against lynchings. Maggie Lena Walker was the first African American woman to found and lead a bank. Josephine Baker, an icon in the jazz era, ran away from home as a teenager and began dancing in New York City. And when she moved to Paris, you guys, her erotic dancing and sex appeal made her an overnight sensation in France, and she went on to use that platform in America to be involved in civil rights causes in the U.S. Zora Neale Hurston, one of the most influential African American writers in the 1900s, used her writing skills in college to talk about race and culture, and is famous for Their Eyes Are Watching God. Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on the bus for a white passenger, became a female icon for the civil rights movement and one of the earlier displays of black women's demands for respect and dignity, which would bring forth such a large contribution to the idea that black women are strong and powerful. Oprah Winfrey, she's a philanthropist, an actress, and activist. She's the first African American woman to have a syndicated talk show and is the first black billionaire, ushering in an idea that is so important and still needing to be worked on, which is representation, because seeing a black woman be a billionaire and have a talk show allowed other Black women to believe that they could aspire to do the same, and Oprah's ability to accomplish these historical markers created the type of wealth that created jobs and now has her owning her own television network called OWN, where a Black woman, gets to decide what kinds of content and shows are going to be played and what kind of role models young Black women get to see and learn from, like Ayanna Van Sant, versus what we see organizations like MTV, VH1, etc. do, which is just perpetuate this narrow caricature of Black women. And another great model was Mae Jemison. She's the first African American woman astronaut, a leading scientist, and an advocate for girls' education, and has empowered people through technology. So my third point is that Black women, despite all the obstacles up against them, all the statistics and the data, have managed to get into these spaces dominated by men and make it possible to represent dreams and aspirations of so many other Black women. And even in these examples I've given, there are so many more women who are not in history books who are doing this type of work every day. Black women who enter into industries where they are severely underrepresented. Black women in law, architecture, medicine, business, etc. I feel like we often think about making history and feminine powerhouses, and we think of people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Marilyn Monroe and Hillary Clinton, but do we tend to see Oprah as a feminist icon or just as this powerful Black billionaire in Hollywood? Because I've always felt she deserved more respect than that. I think Oprah transcends her race and speaks to feminism as a whole. Yet in settings where we have discussions about iconic feminists, I don't hear a lot of people mention Oprah. And while she has a particularly polarizing perception for different Black people, much like Tyler Perry, are we going to deny her in our history textbooks? Because we can and we shouldn't. Since the beginning, when European settlers began slavery in American colonies, slave owners didn't just steal the freedom of Black people. They also took credit for slave inventions over America's 250-plus year history. Taking credit for slave inventions was such a common occurrence that historians know that there's no way of knowing exactly how many or which creations should actually be credited to Black inventors because of this. Madam C.J. Walker was orphaned at 7 years old, and she suffered severe hair loss from a scalp condition, and that led her to invent African American hair care products that led her to being one of America's first self-made millionaires. Marie Van Britten Brown created the early version of the modern home security system because she felt unsafe due to her neighborhood's high crime rate. She was a full-time nurse, and she found a way to rig a motorized camera to record her home entryway, and it projected those images onto a TV monitor. So she included a two-way microphone in order to communicate with visitors without opening the door. Or even Dr. Patricia Bath was the first female African-American medical doctor to receive a medical patent when she invented the laser cataract treatment device, and she was also the first African-American to complete a residency in ophthalmology. Sarah Boone is another one. She patented a design improvement to McCoy's ironing board where it was adapted to be used to iron sleeves and the bodies of ladies' garments. Alice H. Parker patented the use of natural gas for the first time to keep homes warm. So not only are Black women responsible for a lot of the convenient inventions we use to this day, but there are so many Black women inventors who will go unannounced in history due to the erasure of them during the slavery era. So many women's names who go unuttered in conversations of innovation and brilliance, it just breaks my heart. So as my fourth point, so many people have not given Black women the due credit to shaping how American life has been able to maintain this first world-class status. You have largely contributed to the reason why so many people want to emigrate here, because they want to live and raise their children in a land of innovation and greatness. And that idea of innovation and greatness is an idea about America that has been birthed by the bodies and minds of Black women as well. And y'all did that shit. If no one has told you, I want you to know, I give you guys all the praise and credit that's long overdue. So my fifth point is that Black women literally invented American girls' beauty culture of slay. Look at pop culture icons like Naomi Campbell, Tyra Banks, Beyonce, Halle Berry, Angela Bassett, Foxy Brown, Queen Latifah, Lauryn Hill, Diane Carroll, Shaka Khan, Diana Ross, Tina Turner, Iman, Naomi Sims, Nina Simone, Felicia Rashad, Issa Rae, Kerry Washington, Angela Davis, Eartha Kitt, SWV, Escape, TLC, Aaliyah, DeBrad, Mariah Carey, Missy Elliott, Lil' Kim, Nicki Minaj, Rihanna, Destiny's Child, Michelle Obama, Patti LaBelle, Vanessa Williams, etc. Women who have shaped Black beauty and set trends, whether it was clothing, hair, skin, and just overall demeanor. This like sense of like this Black female swag. You guys know what I'm talking about. Women who have embodied this Black elegance on runways and in beauty campaigns, or brought female representation in the male-dominated genre of hip-hop, signing major deals with fashion lines and starring in major films. I mean, there are so many more women I didn't name. Like, I didn't name Whitney Houston. She's another huge one. But it's just one category of the cultural impact on American society that Black women have brought forth. Not just on American society though, but even more specifically in womanhood, femininity, and just overall the idea of being a boss up woman. These Black female rappers contributed to us being able to take the power out of the word bitch and rapped on tracks talking about their sexuality and sexual escapades, like Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown, and just these songs about being powerful and rich women. They broke down so many barriers, and this is why programs like Black Girls Rock was created, to bring a community of Black women together in appreciation. And I feel like Black Girls Rock is exactly what we should be doing as females in all societies, regardless of country and ethnic background. And this is why I say love letters like these are important. It's important for us to hear you, to see you, to credit you, to pay homage to, not to capitalize, appropriate, or use our own personal or financial gain. So for all of the women I've spoken the names of, and for the women that I didn't, on behalf of all women, I want to say thank you to Black women for being these lighthouses and these pioneers, the mirrors that gave us a reflection into ourselves as women, a reflection of our womanhood and our individual journeys of self-acceptance, and for representing women in the White House and on the Forbes list, for always being a part of activism for human rights, for creating nonprofits for healing, for sexual abuse and poverty, for being the innovators of the art of slay as we know it in the beauty industry today, for always showing up for everyone, for holding everything down, for keeping it all together every day, for masking your pain in and using your humor and wit to make others smile. This is a thank you and a recognition to Black women for being a part of a community that has pioneered American life. I hope we can all partner to create a future where your names are on keychains at the store and your shade is represented in every brand's foundation. A future where you don't have to be asked to be seen and heard, where your hair isn't the central conversation for criticism, where you feel protected and shielded by other women, where you can be rightfully paid for the innovations and the fashions you have created, where you are treated equally in medical care and in the workforce, where strength and sass aren't seen as aggressive and intimidating, but rather leadership skills. Futures where you don't have to ask for a day for people to read your infographic, and an era where you don't have to see yourself on the news as another Breonna Taylor. When you love someone truly deeply, you want what's best for them, and you partake every day in doing what that person asks for, that they need of you. I support Black women 1,000%, and while I can't undo history or go back in time to fix it all, no matter how much I wish I could, what I can do is promise to be a better woman who asks for better from other women. A woman who doesn't need to have a Black relative or a significant other in order to care about your Black experience, to come to you with compassion and the skills of an active listener, to see you as you are without you needing to explain it in the perfect, politically correct way that everyone asks you to. And to take the responsibility of not voting on regulations that lower your quality of life, to show up to the voting booth and in social circles in a way that reflects all of these values. All of these things we do because our purpose truly is to love each other. We don't do them as an obligation. We do them because they're a part of getting closer to one another and bonding the human experience more deeply. And I hope that if you're not a Black woman and you're hearing this, that you will take on my challenge to let Black women know that you love them, to tell them something you think is beautiful about them, beyond skin color, beyond racial identity. Because the Black female experience comes in so many different forms, and all of it deserves to be appreciated and loved and accepted. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and hopefully we'll decompress with it and think about your Black girlfriends, or maybe if you don't have any, thinking about why that may be, and how you can diversify your friendship group in order to keep your activism up to date. So join me Thursday for another episode of Sabe podcast, where we will be discussing the wake-up call to Latino America. You do not want to miss it. But I will see you then. Bye.